every human is creative because we all worry. And so it's your creativity thinking of like, I call it fear porn. It thinks of all like the worst case scenarios, but that's your creativity at work. It's playing a movie. It's not a true movie, but it's creating a narrative. When you can stop and you can step back and detach, you can then redirect it.
Welcome to the Dealing with Feelings webcast. Today, I had the opportunity to speak with my friend Jewel, Grammy-nominated singer and songwriter, philanthropist, and mental health advocate. Jewel and I spoke about the strategies she's been using throughout her life to deal with her feelings, from her difficult childhood, to being homeless as a teenager, to being a celebrity. I learned a ton in this conversation and just loved it. And I hope that you enjoy it too. Here we go. Hey, Jewel.
Hey, nice to see you.
You too. How are you?
Yeah, I'm feeling inspired. I'm feeling really energized. And I'm having fun. I'm having some of the most fun as I've had probably in my whole career. So I'm riding a wave. I know these states don't last forever. Life is change, but I'm enjoying it while I have it.
You know, there's a term in psychology, emotional contagion. So I'm going to try to capture some of that from you.
Your mirror neurons are going to catch everything I'm feeling and giving off right now.
I'm excited to have you on Dealing with Feelings. I feel like I'm the host of a game show now. But, you know, the focus of this is on wellness, but a particular focus on healthy emotion regulation. And I've known you for a while, and I know that you've had a journey, you know, in terms of learning about feelings and how to deal with them. And so today is not about Jewel the singer, which we all love. It's about Jewel the person. But I do have a question for you about your singing, if you don't mind. And I know that, you know, you had your kind of big break, you know, if I'm correct, at a club in New York City when you're around 19 years old. And I'm just curious if you remember, like, the feelings that you had going into that gig, and like, how did you deal with your emotions?
Yeah. There was sort of steps. So what you're talking about was a tiny bit later. I think I was signed by then, but it was a really important gig. The time that I remember is when I was homeless. I was living in my car. I was destitute. I almost died in a parking lot of a hospital because they wouldn't let me in because I didn't have insurance. I had sepsis, actually, and I was going to die in the car I was living in. And a doctor had seen me get turned away. And he tapped on my window, and I was covered in my own vomit. And he gave me antibiotics, and he saved my life. It was a hard time. I was shoplifting a lot. I was homeless. I was having panic attacks. I was agoraphobic. I wouldn't leave the corner that I was living on or the car I was in when I had a car. My life really ground to a stop. And it was disappointing because I moved out at 15. That's 3 years earlier. And I knew statistically, if you leave an abusive household and you move out at 15, that movie shouldn't end well. I didn't want to be a statistic. And I thought I came up with a plan when I was 15 of how to avoid what I called repeating the emotional language I was raised with. You know, I realized at 15 that I was taught an emotional vocabulary, and I would speak it just like I speak English. And if I didn't want to speak English, I'd have to go learn French or Spanish. But there was nowhere to learn a new emotional language. And that became my life's mission at 15. How do I learn a new emotional language? How do I pull a new syntax together? And I did pretty good. I mean, I stayed off the stripper pole. Yay me. Got myself through high school. I graduated, actually, even a prestigious high school. I paid rent. I had jobs. But it all kind of came crashing down when this boss propositioned me. And when I wouldn't have sex with him, I knew the price I'd pay. I knew it meant I couldn't make rent. I knew it meant I'd live in my car. I just didn't know how long it would last and how hard it would be and what a terrible mental health decline I would have. But it ended up being the best time. It was the best, worst time of my life, because when you're up against the wall and you realize you could die or you have to make something magic happen, things get black and white. Things get really clear. And I realized nobody was coming for me. Would I come for me? I realized nobody owed me anything. What did I owe myself? And I got incredibly engaged at this time in my life of figuring out behavioral tools. I was able to get a grip on my panic attacks. I was able to help my agoraphobia with the strategies that I developed. I was able to stop shoplifting. I figured out how to be happy at the worst time in my life so that when the record labels come, as odd as it sounds, I felt powerful. I felt like I was in a position of power, even though I was destitute, because of the emotional room and space I found in my body, because of the discipline and the tools and the changes I was getting in my behavior. And so when the record labels came, as odd as it sounds, I almost didn't sign the record deal because I knew, God forbid, you take my background and this tiny little, still fragile grasp I had on behavioral tools. God forbid I get famous. We've seen that movie too. It ends to drugs, mayhem. My job leads to mayhem for people. It's not a great job for people, especially mental health and emotional wise.
Firstly, how did you figure this out? Was it just like an epiphany? Did you read something? Did it just come to you, unbidden? So just share with us a little bit about like the actual like technique that like worked for you.
It happened in stages. There's things I figured out at 15 that set me on a path that really helped. I was reading a lot about nature versus nurture. I was reading philosophy a lot. And I was very interested to see if the way I was raised would obscure my ability to know my nature. What made me think about it was we had a bunny that was raised with chickens and it thought it was a chicken. It had never been around other bunnies and it would peck at its food and it kind of wobbled and it would sit on nests and hatch eggs. And when I moved out, it terrified me because I thought, what if I'm a bunny that was raised with chickens? I didn't know the word trauma, but what I was wondering is, did my trauma, being in such an abusive, neglected environment, obscure my ability to know my nature? And I was peeling an orange one day and I realized that what if my psyche, what if my personality was a response to me trying to be safe in the world? The way that an orange peel is a response, a protective barrier to keep what's inside the fruit protected and safe from the environment. And I realized that all I knew was my peel. I was very invested in my thoughts and my feelings that suddenly, because of that image, made me realize those were just my responses to my environment based on unscrutinized, probably even misunderstandings about my environment, about who I was. I didn't investigate, was I worthless because both my parents neglected me? I just assumed I was worthless. And so that caused me to investigate and realize that I shouldn't invest all of my attention in my peel. And it was bumpy. I had a lot of disturbing personality traits, frankly, already, and a lot of bad self-worth issues, obviously. But what I hadn't ever done in my life was figure out what the fruit was. So what if I stopped investing my energy on the peel and started going down and in? And that became a life strategy. That's still my life strategy. Don't go up and out, but go down and in. It means spend more time contemplating my nature instead of just reacting to my nurture. That meant I had to develop strategies to go down and in. Meditation. My aunt was a TM teacher, and so she taught me transcendental meditation. Writing took me down and in. Basically, anything that made me curious about the inside of me, the fruit, if you will, instead of chasing thoughts and chasing feelings. There's something underneath it, and I hadn't developed any muscle around going in and figuring out who I was inside, my nature, if you will.
I remember us having a previous conversation where you spoke about kind of an epiphany you had about the nature of impermanence.
Yeah, I called it emotional impermanence. I was depressed. I was really, really depressed, and it wasn't changing. And that was new. This mood that had settled over me was starting to feel permanent, calcified around me, which is very scary. And I remember sitting on this cliff looking at the ocean. I grew up in Alaska, and I was just sat there. And I just stared. I had nothing. I don't know why I sat there so long. I was just feeling like done. And I was sitting there, and after many, many hours, I had realized the tides in Alaska are big. They go out for a mile. And it takes a long time. It's just these incremental, tiny little shifts in the ocean. But when you sit there for 4 hours, you're like, the tide moved a half a mile. And you sit there for another 3 hours and you see it starting to come back in. And for some reason, it just dawned on me that basically that the culmination of physics, of the universe, of nature is change. Even when you can't see it changing, sometimes it happens so slow that me, from my human perspective, can't perceive the shifts because I'm moving so fast all the time. But sitting there looking at the ocean, it gave me this perspective of everything changes. All of physics, all of nature culminates in change. So what I was feeling had to change. It was preposterous for me to sit there and feel sorry for myself and think this mood was forever, because that would be saying I'm outside of the laws of physics. And it gave me a tremendous sense of relief because it meant it had to change. I don't know how long it would take. Imagine like all of your emotional energy is capital. And a lot of my emotional energy was going and very invested in this idea that I'm broken and it'll never change and I'll never feel better. That was all a lie. That was not true. It was outside of physics. So now I had a lot of emotional capital that I could redirect into, can I help it change quicker? So again, that's getting curious, and it's starting to study my environment, starting to study how I interact with my environment, and using my curiosity instead of playing fear, it's the worst case scenario, it'll never change. Now I could use that emotional capital and get curious about, it has to change. Can I help it change quicker?
So like a couple of things come to mind. One is, the idea it's like a toothache. When you have a toothache, it's like, this thing is permanent. I want to bang my head against the wall. But the toothache does oftentimes go away, or you may have to get extracted. And it's interesting also because I have a similar strategy, which is just a kind of a self-talk strategy that when I'm in a really kind of difficult place, I learned it from studying Zen Buddhism. That the principle of impermanence, that we're all, everything's impermanent. And I just say to myself, Mark, it sucks right now, but this feeling is impermanent. That there are rainy days and there are sunny days. Today's one of the rainy days, but it doesn't rain every day. You've had lots of rainy days in the past, and then there's been a sunny day. And does that align with the way you're thinking about it?
It does. With the addition of, this has to change. Even if I do nothing, it has to change. It might take a long time, but it has to. That brings a real relief to the nervous system, to me at least. It got me out of a triggered fight or flight, sympathetic nervous response. And it regulated me. That thought would cause my system to relax. And once you're relaxed, you have, again, this emotional capital to redirect. Worry is a misuse of our creativity. Every human is creative because we all worry. And so it's your creativity thinking of, like, I call it fear porn. It thinks of all like the worst case scenarios, but that's your creativity at work. It's playing a movie. It's not a true movie, but it's creating a narrative. When you can stop and you can step back and detach, you can then redirect it. And a little sense of excitement can even happen. And so for me, like teaching this tool to people, it's really noticing the shifts in your nervous system. I'm in fight or flight, I'm worrying. I step back and I know, and I relax into the trust of the fact that this has to change.
Let's say instead of us doing this interview, I'm coming to you and like, Jewel, I'm at the end of my rope. I'm overwhelmed. I'm frustrated. I don't know. I just can't take it anymore. How do you, what would be a way that you might support me in applying what you're talking about?
One of the first things I would do is help you dilate, help you breathe through the intense feelings that you have in your body, and learn to soften with and through these feelings. Because often we're trying to push these feelings away. We're trying to keep them at bay, which causes us to disassociate. Because how do you have hard feelings like this? What I learned is I actually have to move toward them. I actually have to allow them to move through my body. I can't hold them at bay. And so when you soften, when you dilate, when you breathe, imagine your whole system softening and dilating. Now, simultaneously, this is causing your nervous system to start to regulate back toward, your calm nervous state. But you're also going to feel these feelings, and they're going to start to move through you. And you're going to have feelings. You're going to move toward them. You're going to realize how worried you are. You're going to realize how bad you feel. You're going to realize how much grief you might have around it. And you're going to learn to sit with it. But it's kind of like being able to allow this to pass through your system. This is the first phase of allowing this to move through your nervous system. Breathe it out. And now there starts to be a point. It might be in 10 minutes. It might be an hour. It might be you doing this breathing for a day and just sitting and saying this mantra over and over. This has to change. It will change. It's different for everybody, how this starts to move through their body. And then you start to move into this phase where you go, okay, I feel crappy. I know it has to change. Can I help? And then we start to talk, for me, it's about this idea that your anxiety is your ally. What really helped me with this concept was just realizing if I have anxiety, there has to be a biological reason, right? I was willing to think that anxiety was biologically developed to help me. Whereas I spent most of my life, I spent years invested in the idea that anxiety meant something was wrong with me. What if anxiety meant something was right with me?
If we have a mindset that there are bad emotions and there are good emotions, then whenever we feel the quote unquote bad ones, we're supposed to make them go away so we have the good ones. But if you realize, and this is kind of the work that we both do, that emotions are data, emotions are information. It's a whole reframe, because already just saying that to myself, this anxiety is information for me. It's giving me data about who I am and what my circumstances are.
Yeah, I looked at anxiety. I looked at other things that were uncomfortable. I went right to food poisoning for some reason. You eat bad fish, you throw up. It's not fun. Having food poisoning is an awful reaction, but it's a sign of health, right? It's your body being able to, because it's healthy and strong enough, have a reaction to get whatever it needs out of the body. And it teaches you, don't eat bad fish. And anxiety is like that. It's a signal of health in my perspective. It's showing you that you just consumed something that does not agree with you. Except it's not actual food. It means you consumed a thought, a feeling, or an action that doesn't agree with you. Now you can get very curious. I had to work backwards. I started with my anxiety. I didn't know what triggered it. But I would go, okay, I can notice I'm anxious. So now I'm going to work backwards. What was I just thinking, feeling, or doing? My thoughts would happen so quick and I was so disassociated, I didn't even notice I was having a thought that made me sick, made me anxious. So this is a mindfulness practice of learning to slow down, learning to be in my body, which is hard for people depending on what their backgrounds are, but learning to be in my body and say, my anxiety is a sign of health. I'm anxious. What was I just thinking, feeling, or doing? And so I carried a book around, but now you could use your iPhone. And I would write down, what was I just thinking? I'd write that thought down. What was I just feeling? I'd write that down. What was I just doing? I'd write that down. Sometimes I could get all three. Sometimes you just get one. Like I was interacting with Susie. Interesting. Next time I interact with Susie, I want to see if I'm anxious. So you start to kind of become a scientist of yourself because you're the best expert. You're going to notice when you're anxious way more than your therapist will. On Tuesday, when you get back into that meeting with them, if you're lucky enough to have a therapist. This is something where we get to be empowered and start to take control of our mental and emotional health in a really meaningful way. This is investing our emotional capital in a way that will have good payoffs versus trying to control my environment, right? It's like This is going to pay off. And so once you start noticing, every time I talk to Susie, I get anxious. I feel bad about myself. Maybe I shouldn't be friends with Susie. That's kind of where the rubber meets the road in these strategies. Once I realized every time I thought I have no idea what I'm doing, that would lead me into a panic attack. Now I had to intervene. Now I had to develop mindfulness, right? Being consciously present. I had to notice I was anxious. I had to notice, yep, it's that thought again that sends me into a fit. Now what will I do about it? And so it means you have to learn to be observant and notice when I'm starting to engage in this thought. And then I have to replace it with another thought. And I call this strategy the antidote thought. I don't like affirmational thinking because it isn't always true. You can look in the mirror and say, I'm the right weight to attract the right mate or something. It doesn't make you believe it. So you have to find the truth, the antidote, the medicine to this thought that makes you sick. And so you have to experiment a little. So for this thing, for me, I was doing a movie. I'd never acted before. The chances of me really embarrassing myself on a very public level were very high. And the truth was I really never had done this before. I really didn't know what I was doing. So my thought wasn't untrue, which is kind of weird. But the thought made me sick. Every time I would think, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. It would send panic through me. And it was true. But I stopped and went, okay, that thought makes me sick. It's kind of like if you put this food in your mouth and it's toxic, it makes you sick. Can I stop putting this in my mouth? But I'm hungry. I have to eat, right? We have to think. So I needed something else to put in my mouth. I needed a different thought to put in my brain that would cause a different emotional response, that would cause a different neurochemical response. So I had to experiment. I usually start with the opposite. So the opposite of I don't know what I'm doing is I do know what I'm doing. That was a lie. And my body knew it. My body didn't relax when I said that sentence. So you're searching for a replacement thought that is true, that causes your body, your nervous system to relax, right? To get out of a sympathetic, like fight or flight, into parasympathetic nervous system state. So I experimented, and the thought that I found was, I won't quit until I figure it out. That, to this day, almost brings tears to my eyes because it's so true about me. It's so true. And I could rest in the truth of that. And did you hear how my voice drops right now? Like, that's a powerful sentence for me. It's medicine. And so now I had to apply discipline.
You're going through another experience and you're starting to have that doubt, like, what am I doing? And whatever it is, because you're always experimenting and trying new things, I'm sure. And that doubt comes in, you pause, you take a deep breath, or 3 or 4 or 5, and then you say to yourself,
I won't quit until I figure it out. And that's where every day we have these little forks in the road where I can go left and do something, have a thought, feeling, or action that I know disagrees with me, makes me sick, makes me anxious, or I can go right. And that's hard. It's hard to go right because I have neural habitual pathways around the familiar, around going left. And so it takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of presence to say, I am so tempted to freak myself out. But I know where that road leads, and it makes me sick. And so I'm going to choose to go right, and it's hard.
You're bringing me to another question that I have, which is kind of stepping back from the personal strategies to kind of our society. And so recently, I was writing a piece about the field of psychology and emotional intelligence and mental health, and how, in my 30 years, the concept of emotional intelligence skyrocketed, mindfulness skyrocketed. People talk about positive psychology, et cetera. And at the same time, unfortunately, the data are showing that people are worse off than they were when I started my career. And it's very disheartening to be someone who is, running around the world trying to get people to learn about emotions and strategize with them, and see the decreases in mental health or the increases in anxiety and depression. How do you make sense out of the fact that there's more people than ever before focusing on wellness, but people's wellness is diminishing?
The way I think about it is, I'll go back to that idea of down and in. The opposite of that is up and out. So if I'm a child and I was never taught how to go inside my own body and become the observer of thought. So it's not I think, therefore I am. It's I perceive what I think, therefore I am. We have to develop strategies that cause us to become the observer. It puts us in the driver's seat. If my body was a car, my brain is not the driver. It's a steering wheel. If I can observe I'm sad, I'm something other than sad. If I can observe I'm having a thought that triggers me, I'm not the thought that triggers me, I'm the observer of it. We need strategies that help us develop being in the driver's seat. Otherwise, our body is on autopilot. We're on a neurological autopilot. You'll just do what you were programmed to do. Your brain will take over and drive. It just doesn't mean you like where you're going. And so life, the world right now, is constantly vying for our attention at a pace and with a strategy that leverages our psychology to go up and out. Up and out is comparison. Up and out is, did I get enough likes? Up and out is being a workaholic, because you never stop and take time to sit in your life, in your body, and figure out if you even like it. Up and out is how we wake up at 35 and 40 and go, how the F did I get here? I hate my life. Because you never stopped and can go in your own body and let your body tell you, do I like this choice? Do I like this person? We veto it. We override our own unique nervous system that's telling us, it's trying to give us feedback. Do we like our life? We're ignoring it and going, Susie likes her life, so I'm supposed to do that without ever checking in. And so the wellness culture actually is kind of an interesting culture, because I think we're in great jeopardy personally, because wellness is going to go one of two ways. It's going to say all of our thoughts or feelings are justified. If I'm having them, I'm going to indulge in it. That's not necessarily healthy. Just because you're having a feeling doesn't mean it's not entitled. Just because you're having a feeling doesn't make it true. Does it agree with you? Is your life better when you're having those feelings? It's kind of like when I started raising my son and I realized I want him to be emotionally literate. So I had a lot of intentionality around empowering my son's feelings. And then I realized, wait a minute, that allows him to use his emotionality as a weapon. It allows him to say, if I throw a big fit, my mom's going to care and I'm going to get what I want, because I'm going to stop and go, are you having a big feeling right now? No, it's actually, what do we do with feelings? It's not just empowering all of our feelings. And so if our strategies around mental health and emotional health aren't strategic, aren't helping you take accountability, aren't helping you audit if your life is better when you're having those thoughts and feelings and actions, then we're going to lose people. And this movement will just pass. And it's sad. It would be sad.
I appreciate that, because, I think we spoke about this at another time around my frustration with, the social media kind of fixes to mental health, where you have someone with 15 million followers, they're in their car and they're like, just throw your anxiety out the door. And it infuriates me, because as someone who has lived with anxiety for 54 years, who has learned a lot of strategies to deal with it, including some of the ones that we've talked about, I just find it so disempowering to hear that. And so what I'm hearing from you, I think we're on the same page, which makes me happy, which is that it's an implementation problem. That kind of one of your thoughts around the reason why there's so much interest in it, but yet it doesn't seem to have impact, is that we're kind of doing it at a very superficial level. And the stuff that you're talking about, the things that you did to support your wellness, from what I've gathered, and the way you talk about it, it's kind of an everyday process.
For me, it was a stubbornness. It was saying, I refuse to die without learning how to be happy. It's my birthright. I am supposed to be happy. Happiness is a side effect of choices. You can't just get happy. It's impossible. Everybody who's been sad knows you can't just flip a switch and get happy. It's a side effect. And so I called it building a house. You have to build a home for happiness to inhabit. The home, the emotional states that I was participating in did not lead to happiness. And so what was I willing to do? And again, this is where the rubber meets the road for people. You can't just light a candle and feel better. I love meditation. I think it's the doorway to change. But just meditating won't lead to the foundational shifts that you need to make in your life so that happiness can be a side effect. If you're in a bad marriage and you meditate, unless you take some actions based on what you're learning when you meditate, you're not going to figure out how to be happy. And we live in a world of action. And so for me, where mindfulness falls short is there's two phases, and we don't talk about it. The first phase is I have to learn to be consciously present. You just don't have a choice. You have to learn to be in the driver's seat if you want your life to change. So you should learn to meditate. You should learn to do mindful writing. You should take walks in nature. There's a lot of things that help you show up. Once you show up, now what? That's where you're taking the steering wheel and going, I'm not going to go left. I'm going to go right. It's gritty work. It's gritty. And people need to make a decision. And that's why I love the kids in our foundation is I watch every one of them in their own time go, it's me. I'm going to figure this out. Even if I'm 14 years old, I owe myself happiness. What am I willing to do about it? And that's where I talk about reasons versus excuses. You look at me at 18, I had every reason to be unhappy. But so what? That won't change my life. I needed to change my life. So was I willing to let those reasons be excuses? And again, this is like accountability. It's saying, yeah, I was abused. My mom left. I was neglected. It was a shit show, my life. But so what? Did I want to give up? Did I want to roll up the shutters and just call it a day? I really didn't. I really actually wanted to learn how to be happy. And so that's very gritty work. And that's where my job, your job is to create actionable steps, auditable steps. Is what I'm doing working? Do I feel better? If not, wrong strategy. The worst thing is when we go to a therapist or a life coach or somebody and it doesn't work. The takeaway is often, I must be broken. Oh my God, I went to the expert and it doesn't work. Or, oh my God, I learned to meditate and I don't feel any better. I just feel I notice I'm more anxious. That doesn't mean you're broken. That shouldn't be your takeaway. It just means you weren't given the right strategy. And so that mindfulness in two parts. A, learn how to be present. B, have a behavioral tool that starts to change your life. And then have metrics. Is it working?
You're being a scientist around choosing the strategy. You're trying that strategy. And then you're being a scientist again to check in, to evaluate the strategy. Right? Is it working? Is it not working? Is my whatever mantra I'm saying to myself, I appreciate what you said about kind of these catchphrases or affirmations that sometimes people put up. If they feel organic to you and authentic, then fine. But just throwing up, whatever it is, I believe I can fly,
It's gaslighting yourself. The wrong affirmation is gaslighting the authentic experience you're having in your body. That's not good. That is not wellness.
All right. So now my next question, actually, you've kind of answered kind of throughout this conversation, and it really has to do with kind of your development. I've been asking people a question, if you were to have a title for the movie that would describe your emotional development, what would be the title?
I think two things come to mind. They won't sound like movie titles, but
It's okay.
one is a sentence that helps me, and it's, I don't get to choose how life changes, only how it changes me. I realized at a certain point that I was investing in self-help strategies in an effort to control life. It was elegant. It looked like self-growth, and it was. But at the heart of it, my intention was, if I can be perfect enough, feel perfect enough, catch things soon enough, no more bad things will happen to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to face the vulnerable truth that with everything I've been through, there's no way for me to stop another heartbreak from happening in my life. I'm 50. I have more decades to go. And so that was vulnerable. It was really vulnerable for me to sit with the truth of, no matter how wise I get more discerning. You know, I cause less drama for myself. I'm less sabotaging. So those are all within my control. But bad things are going to happen. I'm going to have my heart broken again. I might be betrayed again. And so that sentence, I don't get to choose how life changes, only how it changes me, is my daily commitment to myself. It's
Appreciate
my
that.
daily answer to, holy heck, things just blew up. I have to get back. I have to not spin off. I have to take my nervous system in my own hands again and get regulated. What do I want to do about it?
I think for a lot of people listening to you, just to be really honest, they're going to think, my gosh, she is brilliant, creative, and she was able to figure it out. And I even get envious of the way your brain, honestly, just the way you even think about things. I find it fascinating. And I think of emotion regulation as a creative process. And I'm wondering, yes, I heard you did a lot of reading. For me, I always talk about my uncle, who was my feelings mentor, that person who opened, in my childhood abuse and the bullying that I experienced as a child. He was the first person who I say gave me permission to feel. Was there a person when you were younger that kind of you observed that, or maybe they supported you in a way that helped to shift your thinking?
I didn't have that person. And I learned that safety was isolation.
Okay.
And so, A, I didn't have access to that person. B, I probably even created situations. Like, for me, safety was being alone. That's why I moved out. That's why when I was homeless, I stayed away from homeless kids, because I felt like it was safer alone. I had to spend, in my 20s, a lot of time reworking this idea that connection can be safe. The strategy did work. It did keep me safe for a long time, but at some point it limited my ability to connect to other humans. And that created a tremendous amount of psychological pain that I had to rework. For me, it was being very observant and very curious and using everybody as a role model. Everything was a role model. And I was studying. I just did it in a weird way. I didn't have that mentor, but I did watch that person in that bar use alcohol and become volatile, and it didn't work. So that's a role model. I did watch this dad say something so tender to his daughter when she messed up. I watched that happen in a library. That was kind of revolutionary. He disarmed a bomb. It was fascinating to watch. I could see it. And so that observant part of my nature just really served me well. It was reading books on physics. It was learning about holographic theory and particle non-locality and realizing, wait a minute, what if I could find out? What if I believed that? What if I believed physics made kind of anything possible? It gave me a tremendous amount of hope when I was homeless. It was a really desperate, sad time in my life. But that made me think anything might be possible, and it kind of gave me this emotional energy to try and to tinker.
I appreciate what you said, because first of my research, I've done this study now with about 50,000 people, and only about 30% of our U.S. population, primarily, very, racially and socioeconomically diverse population of people, say they had that figure, that person, that uncle, that aunt, that mom, that dad who kind of was that role model or that feelings mentor. So 70% don't. But what I do hear from you is that you were aware, right? And you notice what, like, oh, I don't like that way that person treats that person. Wow. I remember the same thing as a kid. Like my parents were not nurturing that way. Like my mother didn't even get up with me in the morning after I was like in first grade. She's like, you're gonna make your own breakfast. Yeah. And then I would actually go to my neighbor's house and make breakfast for them. Because they were like, I would cook breakfast for my neighbors because I wanted to be in their house. And it was like, I would watch this house and I'd be like, oh my gosh, like they talk that like their mom gets up early and like sits with them and has conversations with them. Like, that's fascinating. However, and so related to your story and given the work you're doing outside of your music career, it does sound like you are the Aunt Jewel, you're creating conditions through your work to support other people in learning, these kind of skills and strategies. So that's beautiful. And
yeah, we're all built for something different. We're all built with certain talents, all of us. And everybody's body is going to tell them the truth. And so if you have no mentor, you have nothing, you have your body. Your body is going to guide you. If you hear one thing, it's use your anxiety for good. Use your anxiety to listen because it's your teacher. It's going to tell you that made me anxious. And then try to make good on that mentorship that your body is giving you and saying, all right, I'm willing to listen to you and I'm willing to say, I won't consume that thought, feeling, or action. I will commit myself to finding another replacement that doesn't make me anxious. Anybody can do that. And I do think I was built for this. I don't know why. I do think it is a talent of mine. And I plan to make good on that. I plan to not let my suffering go to waste. I plan to not let the tremendous amount of trauma that happened go to waste. I will make this good. It's kind of like if you have a fire, I'm going to turn that into wood and I'm going to grow something beautiful. And I'm going to, if I can help anyone not take as long as it took for me, then it's my obligation. It's an honor to be able to do that for other people.
It's beautiful. Thank you. Ah, gosh, I feel like we can talk forever, but we're going to have to wrap in a few minutes. But I do want people to learn a little bit more about you before we wrap in terms of not just kind of the dark pathways, that in the way you've resolved and dealt with them. So, we have this thing called the mood meter, and it's the yellow quadrant is about high energy, pleasant emotions like happy, excited, elated, ecstatic. So what's Jewel's go-to strategy for like being like happy, happy, happy?
When I'm dysregulated, big nature regulates me every time. Uh-huh. And so I make life choices based on that. I live in the Rockies where I can get out in nature. Like I've made it a lifestyle. I had to because I know it's the surefire guaranteed thing that when I'm stuck, I can dilate and soften and get back in a regulated state. It just does it for me every time. So I'd say that's my go-to. There's things that give me a tremendous amount of purpose, it's interesting because I think a lot of times we confuse excitement for happiness. And I'm curious if people using your meter, I had to work on my son with that and me. There's things I could do that are exciting. It's kind of like eating cake and it gave me a sugar rush, but it didn't actually lead to happiness. Happiness is actually a calm, dilated sense of well-being.
Yeah. So for you, the word happiness is more like contentment. It's that sense of well-being. It's that sense of completeness.
Safety. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that makes me happy.
I'm kind of similar. Like, it is funny though, because I am not a yellow person. That I'm just, I've thought about this a lot as I've been writing. that, as a kid, when I was being terribly bullied, if there was a day that I was in a really good place, people would be like, "Oh, Brackett, I'm going to knock it out of you. Like, what are you so happy about today?" And so it's been interesting for me to think about, like, what do I need to just be joyful, and how do I create that for myself? Because I deserve to have that feeling. It's a good feeling once in a while.
Yeah. In that case, it would take so much safety. Like, you're actually going to have to create an environment, and you're going to have your friends participating in creating an environment where you can be vulnerable enough to be safe. I call that emotional dyslexia. Some of us were taught happiness isn't safe. Vulnerability, that should be a great feeling. Love, that should be a state we aspire to. No, not for me. I was abused, hit, neglected, and then told I was loved at night. You talk about my brain learning pattern matching. No, thank you. I don't want to hear you love me. What do you think that's going to do to all the relationships I'm going to go establish in my life? I had to retrain myself that I had emotional dyslexia. What I called, love wasn't actually love. I had to now create an environment of what is love. I had to create definitions and systems around it the way you do with happiness. And that's so interesting. I don't think we talk about that in emotional intelligence enough, that, happiness for some people won't feel good. It'll make them feel triggered and unsafe.
I agree. It's, and that's that curiosity, as I was writing about mindsets, about feelings, I was like, what's my mindset around happiness? And it was uncomfortable. And I'm like, that's weird. I want to go more into that. Where might that have come from? And I started building out like kind of these patterns of like, even my grandfather, he had this phrase, which was fabulous in retrospect, fabulous for books, not for family. It was, you laugh now, you cry later. It's like,
yep.
Yeah, really? Yeah. Can't wait to spend time with you, Grandpa.
We have to realize, like, experiences cause reactions. Like right now, I started the podcast saying, I feel great. It's also because everything's going my way right now. Mm-hmm. Is happiness getting your way? Maybe.
A little bit.
Is it forever? No, I don't always get my way. Is sadness a sign of not being healthy? No. And so again, going back to that down and in, it's finding this through line. Who am I? All the time. No matter if I'm happy, no matter if I'm sad, no matter if I'm getting my way, no matter if I'm being told no matter if I have a hit, no matter if I get fired from a job. What is this? Because this is impermanent. It's life and it's experience, and it's an incredible thing. But this, for me, is the most real thing. And the more I can develop a relationship with this, that gives me a sense of stability for when I dip down. And it also gives me a sense of stability for when I'm high right now on a wave.
It's understanding that all emotions are impermanent, both that feeling of like, sometimes when I'm giving a speech on a stage, I feel like I've got it. I'm sure you feel that way when you're on stage singing, and like the audience is with you, you tell the right joke or you do the right note, and you're just like, yes. And then there are days where I'm sitting on my computer writing a chapter. I'm like, I know nothing. But I know that's impermanent too. You know what I mean? Like, and so just recognizing that is so important. So thank you for like reminding us of that.
And on that, like, I would say, like, when I'm high, you're literally high. You're literally high on your neurochemical response. You're getting rewarded. You're getting a payload of neurochemical, like, drugs. And when I realized I could become a drug addict to my own neurology, my own biochemical responses, that I could make myself do this and it would excrete hormones and drugs that I liked, that was a whole new level of like learning. I would love to talk about that next time, because that teaches you a lot about yourself and how you're learning in just behavioral health, like animal behavioral health, how you're learning to reward yourself. Because a lot of times it would be negative, right? When I was stealing, I was getting a high. But I needed it. I needed the high. I needed the pick me up. I was feeling really bad and anxious. So I learned how to become a drug addict without ever touching an outside chemical substance. I did it by behavior and getting my body to excrete specific drugs and hormones. And that was a whole amazing journey of learning for me.
Last question. So we're all in this together. I'm going to ask you to imagine a world where everything we talked about today, that these teachings they're embedded in such amazing ways, that it's just part of our education system. It's part of companies. It's part of families. What do you see being different about the world?
I think the side effects will be that people cause less self-inflicted drama. And that'll really reflect in the workplace. You may not stir the pot. You might notice when you're actually insecure and you're jealous of a workmate, and you can stop and go, that's interesting. That's a me problem. That's not so-and-so's problem. It's going to keep you from having reactionary things that cause drama and pain. And it's going to put you in a position of power because you'll form a thoughtful response. So just with that one scenario, instead of going and being nasty to so-and-so in the workplace because I'm actually just jealous, I'm going to sit. I'm going to notice I'm insecure. I'm going to do some work around that. I'm going to figure out where I am secure. I'm going to turn that into power. And now I'm going to be able to behave in a way that attracts what I want rather than self-sabotages. If you can get in a state where people are doing that, that's real power. We have the wrong idea of power. That's real power. That puts you in a position of power in your life.
And so that's self-power, right? Because you're going to have a sense of wellness and control, but it's also relational power, right? You're going to have just better relationships, which is at the core of what we want also. And just before we end, obviously people know who you are, but where can they find out more about you? What are the places they should go to learn more about inspiring children, your book, Never Broken, and other things?
Thanks. Yeah. Inspiringchildren.org is the foundation. We started a mental health platform based on these types of tools in VR. It's called Inaugural. And so that's where people can go for mental health intervention. That's behavioral tool based. It's actually scaling tools, not therapists, using trained guides. So then go to Innerworld for that. There's Jewel Never Broken, which is just sort of, more of a community-based, behavioral-based community. That's it.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jewel. My big take-home message was, actually there were a lot of take-home messages, but I think the big one for me was our conversation around the principle of impermanence. That was powerful. That emotions come and go like the tide. That when we recognize the impermanence of the lows and the highs, we can truly be happy. Please let me know down below in the comments your thoughts about the episode. I'm very interested in whether you've used any of the strategies that we talked about. I want to invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, share the episode with your friends and family, and also follow me on social media to gain additional knowledge and tips. Really glad to have you on the Dealing with Feelings journey with me. See you next time.